Happy 4th of July, everyone. Jason Gilbo here at Jacob11, breaking down GPP bats and some stacking options together. Doing a little bit different here. Going to go game by game just for today, just to tackle the two main slates between the sites. Your normal 14 games here today. A lot of options. On today's slate, the late one's a little bit interesting. I kind of talked about in the pitching pod, but we'll look, at the early one here first. Yankees, Blue Jays, you got two lefties in this one, J.A. Happ and CC Sabathia making a start here. Right-handed bats are obviously going to be in play. Looking at the Toronto side here first against lefties. Donaldson always makes a notable appearance. Been struggling a little bit of late, but you got to like the potential here in kind of moving forward. I mean, as far as anyone else goes, Russell Martin, sure, I have a little bit of interest in 171 ISO against righties. But the two first basemen here, Justin Smoke, Kendrys Morales, it's always kind of a tough pick. You look at Smoke, 451 WOBA off lefties, 264 ISO. Kendrys Morales, 375 WOBA, 225 ISO. Steve Pearce, always an interesting play as well, 275 ISO against righties. So, I have interest here against CC Sabathia, who against righties, 28% line drive rate. That's something that you can consider. Sierra's up over 4. CC is just not a good arm. I definitely like the righties in this one. As far as the Yankees side of things, Happ has just been a guy who continues to kind of churn out decent starts. Against righties, he hasn't been really that bad. 45% ground ball rate, 25% strikeout rate. So, against lefties here, obviously Aaron Judge becomes a factor. Gary Sanchez hasn't been great against lefties, but, I'm not going to just completely write him off. We see a lot of these guys who hit righties better than lefties start to match lefties sooner or later. But I'll tell you that this back half of the lineup is just going to be gross. Starlin Castro's not there. Aaron Hicks banged up. Matt Holliday as well. This is kind of a bad lineup. I could see J.A. Happ maybe giving up a bomb here or there, but I don't think it's going to be one of those ones where there's a ton of potential. So, I don't mind some of those Yankees bats, but they're not my favorite offense on this slate. Moving forward here, it's Giants and Tigers. This one's interesting. Got Michael Fulmer on the hill for Detroit. This is a guy I just don't really pick on. Good ground ball rate against both sides of the plate. You move away here. ISO under 270. I just don't see any real upside with these Giants bats. I'm kind of not really on them today. Detroit's a team that I'd rather take a shot with against righties this year. 349 WOBA to right-handers, allowing a 173 ISO as well. This is the offense that I want on today's slate. You can stack them up here. Kinsler, Avila, Upton if he's in the line, JD Martinez, Miguel Cabrera, Nick Castellanos. Righties very much in play. Avila, he's been spectacular at the catcher position. You look at Kane against lefties, 357 WOBA. So, this is a guy I'll just continue to target all day. They're stack worthy, 1 through 7. Play him. One of the highest run totals on the entire day, actually, up around 6 on this main slate. So I love them a lot. They'll be a team that I use really as a core. Once again, I just don't even find that DraftKings once again just underprices them. No one's over 4,500 in this lineup, so you'll be able to stack away and feel pretty comfortable with it. So. Moving on, Los Angeles against Minnesota. This one is always a sneaky game. It was a sneaky game last night. It's a sneaky game today. Kyle Gibson's on the hill. This is a guy who's just really struggled against both sides of the plate this year. I'll just be continuing to look and basically fire away with whoever. Against righties, 399 WOBA. Albert Pujols becomes in play, Cole Calhoun, Cameron Maybin. That's about it for me, though. I just think the front three is really where I'm looking to make some damage. Minnesota, on the other hand, you look at J.C. Ramirez. This is a guy who's really struggled with lefties. 404 WOBA to lefties this year. Home runs per 9, a little bit of an issue. So Grossman, Joe Mauer, sorry, but I know you hit the homer last night, but I just can't go back. There's no real upside. I'd rather take, Kenneth Vargas, who was over 200 ISO against righties, and a more consistent power upside. Yeah, the strikeout rate's high, but he just has a ton of power. Max Kepler as well, homered last night. He's starting to come around over 200 ISO against righties. That's kind of what the real upside for me there is those bats right there. So Brian Dozier was a late scratch, but you may not get him in the lineup. We could see Jorge Polanco maybe, Eduardo Escobar. The guy who I'd be really intrigued with is Eddie Rosario, 352 WOBA, 203 ISO against righties this year. He'd be the guy to take a look at, so wouldn't mind him. Miami, St. Louis. We saw St. Louis explode last night. They're facing Jose Urena. This is another guy who you can really fire away against. Right-handed heavy lineup here in St. Louis. He's on a 334 WOBA to righties. 28% line drive rate. Obviously, you have Matt Carpenter as well, who always goes low-owned at the first base position. But then you look, Tommy Pham, Steven Piscotty's been a guy who's actually hit righties better than lefties this year. Jed Jerko's hit fine. All those ISOs up over 180 outside of Piscotty, who's at 168. And then you got Grichuk, who's on a little roll here with a 201 ISO against righties. So, I don't mind going back to well with St. Louis. I kind of want to get a gauge on their ownership. If they're going to be popular because of recency bias, I might stay away and look elsewhere, but I don't hate it. On the other side, Lance Lynn, I just don't like targeting with righties. Lefties, you can make a case for, obviously. That's where the money is. Christian Yelich, I'll take a look at. Justin Bour, obviously, against righties. Those are probably the only two standout bats from left side that I'll consider in this one. Tampa Bay, Chicago, wind blowing in here. John Lester taking on Chris Archer. Tampa Bay side, I don't really want any piece of these bats. Wilson Ramos is actually a lefty as well in his career. Not a bad option. You can look at some of the guys that will steal some bases, but there isn't a ton actually in this lineup that I see right now. So Lester's been better off at home. I'm not really on Tampa Bay side, and even on the Chicago side, I just don't see a lot of upside here. Archer pretty good against right-handers. Lefties have tagged him for a little bit. You can make a case for Rizzo, but outside of that, there's no one that I'm really considering in this one. Should be a low-scoring game, kind of a pitcher's duel, so you can kind of stay away for the most part for offense. Pittsburgh and Philly next here. This is a team with a lot of potential. I like some upside on the Pittsburgh side. There's a decent amount of guys going in this one that I have some faith in, just because you got Mark Leader making a start. Pittsburgh's totals right around 4.75. I don't mind the lefties. Yeah, he looked fine in his first start, but Adam Frazier is an interesting. Josh Bell in this ballpark. Ray Polanco, Andrew McCutcheon. Those are the guys that I look to kind of use and feel pretty good about, just because rookie right-hander in this ballpark. Like I said, the Vegas totals are high. You look at Polanco, he's been struggling this year, really has. They've dropped him down the lineup, but continues to be kind of underpriced for the potential that he has. McCutcheon, there hasn't really been a hotter hitter in baseball, so I like the upside of those guys as well. On the Philly side, I just don't really see anyone that I love a lot. Italian's a guy that I actually look to use. Freddie Gallo is interesting out of the 2-hole, but Odubel Herrera, if he's leading off again, I think it was Daniel Nava last night, but they have one of the lowest run totals on the slate. You can probably look to stay away. Oakland, Chicago, James Shields taking on Daniel Gossett. On the Chicago side, they have right around a 4-run total. Gossett's a guy I don't mind as a value play. He's actually not that bad of a pitcher, but you can make the case for Jose Abreu, against a righty, 199 ISO against right-handers this year. Matt Davidson's always an interesting pivot at first base with his power, but the strikeout rate's insanely high. 46% strikeout rate, 278 ISO. So, I don't mind him. I think he's worth a look on today's slate. But once again, there's just not a ton that I love with this lineup and the way that they're putting things out. On the other side, though, I definitely will like James Shields and kind of picking on him here. You're going to get some decent value. Jed Lowry, 209 ISO against righties, always kind of forgotten in that ballpark. Matt Joyce, 197 ISO against righties. Chris Davis, massive 314 ISO against right-handers. Yonder Alonso, Ryan Healy, if he's in the lineup. Oakland makes for a good sneaky stack here, especially in the value department. Not bad prices, especially over on FanDuel. DraftKings are priced up actually a little bit more, but the front couple of guys balance it out a little bit. So I like the upside of the A's. We'll be looking to use them in GPPs quite a bit, actually, and get some kind of exposure because they should get lost a little bit on this big slate. So moving on, Baltimore, Milwaukee. This one is going to be one that I target Milwaukee quite a bit here. Ubaldo Jimenez struggles with lefties, over 390 WOBA. Doesn't miss a lot of bats either. You're going to get, Jonathan Villar, Eric Sogard, Eric Thames, Travis Shaw in that lineup. Travis Shaw's, got popped in the hand yesterday. Should be back in the lineup, at least from what he said. I like the upside that he brings. 387 WOBA, 268 ISO against righties this year. Ton of potential. Eric Thames has been really boomer bust, but I like the potential for him as well. Then Sogard, VR, two kind of guys that are VR hasn't been good at getting on base, but Sogard has. I like the potential for them. Just got to see if they're in the lineup. And then if we get Stephen Vogt there, made a nice little debut at Miller Park, 2 homers. Like his upside for a cheap catcher price. On the other side, Baltimore's going to line up a lot of right-handed bats. You just look at Jimmy Nelson. I talked about him in the pitching pod. Doesn't have a big strikeout rate against righties, but he's just allowing a lot of weak contact, a lot of weak ground balls, 59% ground ball rate. So I'm not really in love with anyone here in this game. I mean, you can always make the case for the outfielders and Machado at the cheap price, but I'm just kind of done and off of them on today's slate. I mean, sure, they're cheap. You can toss them in. I have no problem with a one-off of Machado or Scope or Jones or Trumbo, but that's about it for me. I just don't think that the run total really matches up unless something happens with Nelson where he's out pretty early or, they just end up getting to him, but I just don't really see it. So I'm kind of staying away for the most part. Moving on, this is a weird 640 game. You got Seattle and, Kansas City. 640, I think this is on the DK main slate. I don't see it on the FanDuel one, so we'll talk about it here. Felix Hernandez making a start. I don't have a lot of appeal from this Kansas City team. Not to say that Felix Hernandez is good anymore, but he's good enough to just kind of keep guys at bay. I don't see a huge blow-up. I don't see really any potential for these guys that I'm just jumping all over. On the Seattle side, you can say Duffy, who's making a start off the DL. Might be a little bit rocky, but you're also looking, Nelson Cruz is banged up. Danny Valencia, I just don't love a lot on this slate. This is kind of just a stay-away game. It's an easy 640 game that I just kind of often forgetting. One of the lower run totals on the slate, so I'm kind of off of it there. Breaking into the late slate, we got San Diego and Cleveland. San Diego, no thanks against Kluber. This guy's just untouchable right now. On the Cleveland side, I have some interest in some of the lefties against Trevor Cahill, Kipnis, Lindor, Brantley. But I also don't mind kind of going down the back half and like a Chisenhall, Santana, Zimmer. Those guys, I don't mind. Zimmer, 368 WOBA off righties this year, 200 ISO. Santana, 335 WOBA, 186 ISO. Chisenhall, 379 WOBA, 186 ISO. I always like that back half Cleveland stack or kind of adding them in or using them as value. And it's just going to be key on tonight's slate because of the pitching that's going on. So that's kind of where I'm looking. You don't get quite the discount on some of these guys, but Jason Kipnis and Francisco Lindor both struggling a little bit of late, but the prices show and it's not that bad of a matchup. And you got the run total there up around 5.5. So very much in play for Cleveland. Like them a lot. Houston, Atlanta, this is one where it's like, you want to take the pitching this one because there's no real other strong options. Is it the best ballpark? Definitely not. Do these guys have some weaknesses? Sure. Look at the Houston side. Newcomb's going to be a talented pitcher in this league. You can definitely see it. He's got really good stuff. Against the Houston team, this is just a tough place to go. I mean, George Springer's a guy that matches lefties, 355 ISO. Gaddis, Correa, Marwin Gonzalez, solid numbers against lefties. Alex Bregman's actually hit lefties really well, 373 WOBA, 175 ISO. So there's a little bit of an issue here for me in just kind of using using these, Newcomb tonight. I talked about him as a cheap option, but Houston bats are in play. I think they're a good pivot off of Coors. And looking at their prices, they are high. That's the one downside to them. But some of the back half guys there, like Gurriel, like Bregman, Jake Marisnick, those are the kind of the values that you're going to be needing if you're going to be playing up for Kluber and Kershaw. So that's kind of where I'm looking with Houston. On the Atlanta side, I don't really like targeting Houston, just because they got a pretty good bullpen. Peacock's going to be a guy who probably limits a lot of damage and picks up a decent amount of strikeouts, and just doesn't give up a lot. So, I won't be really looking at anyone. I mean, maybe a Matt Adams, maybe a Matt Kemp, but those are probably the only two power guys that I'll really consider on this one. Boston and Texas, this is a great GPP bats game, even with the pitching going. I think because the name value carries there, still a really hot night in Texas. I'm intrigued. And on the Boston side, Darvish is a guy who's still getting up some hard contact to lefties. That's one thing to note. Has he been pitching a little bit better? Yeah, the strikeout rate is starting to come alive. That's why the hard contact rate's been up this month. But I do think there's some potential here for some of these lefty bats. Like a Benintendi, a Moreland, Jackie Bradley Jr. I don't hate those guys as one-offs just because they do have a little bit of a price discount. Mookie Betts on DraftKings too. His price tag $4,600. This is a guy who can get it done. We see you Darvish blow up every now and then. If you want to be ahead of the curve, or not ahead of the curve, if you want to be different from the crowd, I can definitely see going that route. So, that's one thing to know. I think there's some potential here for the Sox to at least get up and over into kind of 3 or 4 run range against Darvish. If they can get him to about 5 or 6 innings and have him kind of labor and struggle on getting him out of there early, you get this bullpen for 4 innings, and then we can kind of do some damage there. So I like Boston, good contrarian team to target tonight. Even on the other side against Price, who's been a guy who's just working his way back from injury, hasn't really been all that great, but you got some guys against lefties who you can target. Elvis Andrus, Adrian Beltre. I don't mind it. Robinson Chirinos, Mike Napoli, Delonta Shields. There are some right-handed bats in here that you can target. In that Texas, total, it's up around 4.8. So I don't mind them. This is a good GPP team to just really target on tonight's slate. Getting the Coors here, low-scoring night last night, and that was because he had some guys that kept the ball on the ground. This isn't one of those nights where Coors is probably going to be low-scoring. This is probably a start where Homer Bailey wishes he wasn't making. This guy has, a lot of 14 earned runs over his last 2 starts, working his way back from the DL. Now he goes to Colorado. Load up here. Load up on, I usually don't target maybe the back half guys, but on a smaller slate, give me the cheap catcher for Colorado. Give me Raimel Tapia. Give me Trevor Story. Give me Carlos Gonzalez, who's down in price a little bit. I'll take those guys on tonight's slate and get that value wherever I can. So Homer Bailey struggling against both sides. He's been awful to start this year. I don't see any reason that just doesn't continue tonight. On the opposite side, I have some interest in some of these Cincinnati bats. The problem is Kyle Freeland, just a heavy ground ball pitcher, 63% to righties this year. Doesn't allow a ton of home runs, but you just look at his numbers. I mean, doesn't miss a lot of bats either. I still think Zach Cozart, great option tonight. 473 WOBA off lefties this year, 255 ISO. Adam Duvall, 449 WOBA, 375 ISO. Eugenio Suarez, 349, 186. Mesa Rocco's in the lineup. I don't mind him as a cheap catcher. There's some potential there for him. Tucker Barnhart, even if he's in there. So, I like the Reds bats. I think Freeland obviously is a guy who, wouldn't surprise me if he goes out there and throws 5 or 6 innings, but gives up 3 or 4 earned runs. You just kind of got to hope that you get that cheap one-off bat. And some of those guys are just not – Cozart's not expensive on DraftKings at all. I mean, he's 4.3. You look at Jose Peraza, he's 3.3. Eugenio Suarez, 3.9. So there are some cheap bats. I mean, Votto, Duvall are expensive, but you always kind of expected that. But, is some decent upside there. Last game of the night, Arizona and LA. I'm not really looking to use anyone on the Arizona side. Didn't get priced down at all on DraftKings, FanDuel. Obviously they did because they usually do. You got Paul Goldschmidt is $3K, and then everyone else is just 1.8 or 2K. So, Sure, if you want to toss one in to be contrarian and use someone and hope they get a hit, you can do that. But we'll look at more of the serious approach and take some of these Dodgers bats against Patrick Corbin, who has been poor on the road this year. It's been a little bit weird, but looking at these Dodgers bats, starting to come around. You look at Corbin, 367 WOBA to righties, 194 ISO. Chris Taylor, Corey Seager, Justin Turner, Austin Barnes, Logan Forsythe, Kike Hernandez, Yasiel Puig, Trace Thompson if he's in the lineup, if you need a cheap bat. There's just a lot of options here. These platoon bats are starting to come around for LA. It's showing over the last few games against a couple of lefties. Total rate around 4.5. It's not a bad weather night there in LA. Wind blowing out just a little bit, about 82 degrees. So I like those platoon bats quite a bit. I'm hoping that they get a nice little value lineup spots for some of them. So let's wrap it up here. I can breathe. Have a good 4th of July and be safe out there, and good luck, guys.